Hello and welcome to Breakfast All Day. I am Matt. That is Christy.
Hi. Alonzo's here someplace too.
Someplace, but he didn't get to see what is one of my favorite movies of the year. It's not necessarily the best, but I loved this movie. Ford versus Ferrari, originally called and released in some parts of the world as Le Mans 66.
I think Ford versus Ferrari is a better title.
Well, it's a better title in the U.S. because so few people in the U.S. watch the Le Mans Grand Prix.
Do you watch the Le Mans Grand Prix?
It's 24 hours, so I don't necessarily watch it, but I watch the highlights. But there's a lot of international racing that is, look, if it's not NASCAR or IndyCar, it doesn't get the same necessarily play in the States that it does everywhere. It's like World Cup.
But
right?
you know enough to know what it is and why it matters.
Yes, but I do think in the States, Ford versus Ferrari is going to make it sell better.
Right.
And this movie is terrific. I loved this movie. So this movie is the story of Ford deciding to take on Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is one of the most grueling car races, fastest and grueling. I mean, it's not like it's, the Baja 5,000, or 1,000.
It's arduous.
But it's arduous. It's 24 hours on a very, inconsistent road, especially in the 60s. And Ford set out to take down Ferrari, who had dominated that race and almost every other race for years, if not decades, and puts a team together. And, although the publicists have told us not to spoil what happens, I maintain it is tough to spoil history. That being said, this movie's terrific. I loved it. Look, it's got a few flaws, both as a car nut and I think narratively. But one of the things it does really well is I think the racing scenes are very exciting and feel relatively immersive in a way that Ron Howard's movie Rush doesn't. I was disappointed.
Rush was fun,
but I didn't feel the sense of speed, the sense of danger the way this movie does. Because the other thing this movie does, somewhat similar to what we see in First Man, you get to realize how rickety those cars are. Like, these cars in the 60s, there's no safety restraints. They don't have anti-lock brakes. We see in this movie, so when we finally get to the Le Mans race, you see Christian Bale as
Ken
Miles, and all the other drivers run to their cars, right?
In their little one-piece uniform.
Run to the cars, start the cars, and start racing. And what used to happen is, because nobody wanted to lose the time putting the seatbelt on, those guys just start their cars up and start going as fast as they could and hope that they would make it safely to the big, long straight so that they could then fasten their seatbelts.
That's craziness. Well, we should mention, so Matt Damon plays Carroll Shelby, legendary car designer, former driver, car designer Carroll Shelby, whose most famous car is
the Cobra.
Right. And which he drives in this movie.
Which we see
him tooling around town in this movie. And he has this long-time working relationship / friendship with Christian Bale, this legendary driver, Ken Miles. And they both have these giant personalities, which quite often are aligned, but
not always.
But quite frequently also they clash. And sometimes it happens physically, where they are like little kids rolling around the ground, beating the crap out of each other with whatever they can find to hit each other. This is director James Mangold did this, and it's a very old-fashioned kind of big studio piece of filmmaking.
Right. When men were men.
No, when men were men. There's also there's a weightiness to just the look of it, and it's an old-fashioned kind of glossy prestige award season picture. I mean, in good ways. I'm not saying that as a disparaging kind of comment. It's not necessarily safe. It's feel good, but not necessarily in the ways that, it's not mawkish, I would say. And both actors are doing such tremendous work because they both get these really showy parts.
Yeah.
I mean, Christian Bale is playing up this British accent, and he's just this wild card. I mean, and that's part of what makes him great at what he does, is that he's fearless and he will take chances, but it also makes him a difficult human being to deal with on a daily basis.
But not so much he's a loose cannon, but because he's, not like we see, it's not like watching The Joker. It's not like watching these guys who are genius a-holes. Like, he's really good at his job and he knows it. And people who should know, like other drivers, also know it. But everybody else gives him grief for it,
and
right?
People who want to corral him,
right,
like Henry Ford.
Right. Well, or really Leo Beebe, who
Right.
was the head of Ford Racing at that
Josh
time,
Lucas.
right? Played by Josh Lucas, who really is the villain here. But, we get to see what's his name is
John Bernthal.
John Bernthal
As
is
Lee
Lee
Iacocca.
Iacocca.
And Tracy Letts is so great as Henry Ford.
As Henry Ford
oh my
II.
God.
There's a lot of history in there. I mean, Lee Iacocca had famously helped get the Mustang off the ground inside of Ford. And it was his idea to go to Shelby to help out with the racing process. Ford did decide to take on the racing giant Ferrari out of revenge because Ford was going to buy Ferrari. And we get in this movie that Ferrari was using Ford to up their price from Fiat. That actually didn't happen until years later. But Ferrari did famously say, I'm not going to sell my company to an ugly American company that makes ugly little cars. And insulted Ford. And Ford's like, okay, fuck you. Right? Okay, you're going to insult us? Okay, I'm going to hit you where it hurts. Because the thing is, a lot of people would argue that till his dying day, Enzo Ferrari only had Ferrari as a car company to support his racing efforts. That was his true passion. So the only reason he was selling passenger cars is to fuel the racing development that he was doing. That's what meant a lot to him. Clearly, I'm a car geek.
I was going to ask you, so is it totally consistent with what you know about the history of all these people? Okay.
No, it's not.
They've
it's
changed
not,
it dramatically?
They've changed a lot, and that's okay because you would have needed another hour to get into stuff, right?
Okay.
Like,
and it's 2.5 hours long.
it's 2.5 hours. You would have needed another hour, right?
Okay.
It's the timing is off in a few places. The movie makes it look like it wasn't until Shelby came along that anyone even started taking on Ferrari at Ford. Like, they hadn't even planned to go to Le Mans. Well, that's not exactly the case because the Le Mans, the GT40 car was based on a British car made by Lola, and they were already using Ford engines, and that had been in development for a year or so previously, but that would have added another hour. Like, this movie spends a lot. I mean, look, like it is an hour and a half before we get to Le Mans and see the race, and you spend an hour covering a 24-hour race. But this is a movie that takes enough I think it takes creative license in the right places to get you the gist of what happened, right? And the gist was Ford decided that they were going to take on Ferrari, and they needed to bring in someone like Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles to really help make the program happen. You had internal forces that were trying to mess with the flow, and if anything, this movie's kind of this anti-corporate hero story.
And yet, how American is it?
Right.
The celebration of like American ingenuity and know-how and stick-to-itiveness in the face of like the precious, shiny Italian contender.
Well, but it's also like, force of will and intelligence and passion and know-how instead of bureaucracy and marketing, and it's more. There's this real struggle about the individuals and what they know and what they know that they know and they know that they're right about, and leave us to do our job, and we're going to get you the thing that you want. And yet, I mean,
they're mavericky.
They're mavericky, but it's almost like, there's this great scene where you see Carroll Shelby as they've developed it, and at one point, Shelby gets the go-ahead, like, you're in charge. And then at some point, because Leo Beebe is in Detroit with Ford, has put enough poison in his ear that Beebe gets control back, right? And is threatening to undo a lot of things, most notably keep Ken Miles from going to the race because he's too much of a loose cannon. I will say the way Miles is portrayed in here by Christian Bale, I think Christian Bale, I can't remember the last time he was this charming in a movie.
The wrestler. Maybe not charming, but like
The wrestler?
No, sorry, the fighter.
The fighter.
Where he's just like magnetic, and you can't.
Right.
You
No,
can't
I
stop
think that this was a guy who was super charming, and like
he
can be, and where you cross it, like where he'll get mad at you is when you challenge him on something that he's right about. or he knows he's right. Right.
He's very sarcastic. He's very quick-witted.
Yeah, but I thought he was great in this.
He and Matt Damon have great chemistry with each other.
But
and Matt Damon's like this old-fashioned kind of like swaggering, good old boy cowboy
there's so
character.
much swagger in this movie. But I was getting to the point about where Shelby takes Ford, and there's the tease of it in the trailer where Shelby takes Ford out for a ride in the GT40, right? And it's crazy. Like, that car was crazy, right? It had to be terrifying, right? I've not ever ridden in one.
Going
but
200 miles an hour.
200 miles an hour. And they do this scene in the trailer where it's played for laughs in the trailer that Ford starts crying because he's so scared. And the way the scene plays out is different and great because he's crying out of passion.
And I interpreted it also as humility.
And humility.
Right, because he's such an asshole. And he's so commanding and so totally convinced of his own certainty about everything. And here he finds out, oh, this is something I didn't know about. I was wrong. I underestimated this.
Right.
And that's what I found powerful about it.
Right. And there's, and look, like, you've got a lot of characters who all know what they know, right? And the tension and the conflict in that, it's less about Ford versus Ferrari. It's really about Ford employees versus contractors. But I love this movie. Look, like, I could pick apart a lot of the things in the racing that aren't right. Like, there's a lot of times you'll see on that long straight where there'll be a gear shift to go faster. Like, that's not the way that works, right? By the time you're going into that curve on the Mulsanne straight, you're in your highest gear already. If you're not in your highest gear, you're not going to win, right? You've already gone into your highest gear. You don't hit the gas harder and shift to go faster in that situation, right? On the straightaway. But the movie does what it needs to I think, get the tension and the drama of the racing in place. And there's a lot of great stuff. And again, like I said before, the movie does a really good job of, like, these guys are cowboys, right? And it makes you feel that. And I think it works really well. And I'm willing to overlook the factual inaccuracy because I think this movie really captures the spirit of what those guys set out to do.
I want to mention a few things technically. We were talking about the way that the race scenes were shot. There's a couple of really cool camera angles where, like, the car is coming around a curve and the camera's over here and they're like curving in toward each other. And you have this sense of like bracing for collision. It's thrilling. And they do it a few different times where the car's coming around and the camera, it's an unexpected camera angle as opposed to like following it around. It's like they're on a collision course with each other. You get shots that really, you get a sense of how fast the cars are. Yes. And as you say, the ricketiness of them.
Right.
I know you said that sometimes the gear shifting and all that is inaccurate, but the way that transition is edited, like the bam, bam, bam of the cutting makes you feel like you are a part of things. Also, if you can see this in a theater with great sound.
Oh, the sound is so good. And the music's really rad too.
It is, but the sound, I mean, it's not, where I saw it at least, was not one of the like 4DX theaters, but you still feel the rumble of it. If you're in a place with great sound, you can also feel how it goes from like one side to the other, like from left to right. That was really cool. Also, I want to mention Noah Jupe, who is in it as Christian Bale's, or as Ken Miles' son. Yeah. He is lovely and like brings a grounding to it and not a precocious kid nature to it at all. He's also very good as young Shia LaBeouf in Honey Boy, which we're also going to talk about later on today.
Caitriona Balfe is Miles' wife. Right. Isn't given enough to do, but it's not a nothing part. I think she is good. And
she's a grounding force.
She's a grounding force. And you see that his decision to race or to not race is very much a group decision with that. I'm like, it's very much a partnership, I felt like. And one of the things I think this movie does good about, I felt like the movie does a good job of bringing in someone who may not necessarily understand about some of the elements of racing or car work. Like when Miles lectures that guy about how he's driving his little MG wrong, right? And he's like, look, you're supposed to keep the revs up on this. You're supposed to drive it hard. If you're just driving around town, it's going to not run right? Or when Shelby explains how hard it really is to design a car for the Le Mans track, right? Because he's right. Like that's one of the longest straights in racing. And it's this bumpy, shitty road. Like it's not a smooth, that wasn't built as a racetrack. They converted, there's some of that track that is purpose built for racing, but most of it's country roads. and back when they were racing back then, like there's not like a pit it's not like there's a wall between the pit and the track.
It's
right.
all
It's
out
like
there.
it's all just out there.
And it rains.
And it rains. Exactly.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I brought Nick with me to see it, and he loved it too. And he was asking questions during it, and he really liked everyone in it. But he thought Carroll Shelby seemed nice. He seems nice.
I don't know that Shelby necessarily had that rep.
But that's a testament to Matt Damon and how charismatic he is in the role.
Well, that's what Shelby was
Right?
able to get away. I mean, I do love that they mentioned that Shelby has sold the same car 3 or 4 times, and that was that kind of chicanery was something that would come up for the rest of his life. Like he not only was he's this legendary car builder and designer, he also was shady from time to time.
Anyway, it's a lot of fun. I'm giving it an 8.7.
I'm giving it a 9.
Okay.
I really loved it. It again, like maybe a little long in some places. But it's terrific, and go see it.
Yes, 8.9 is our number. It's at 91% on the tomato meter.
Good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. If you have not done so, check out our Patreon, where we are covering lots and lots and lots of television. Patreon subscribers can watch us recap The Mandalorian, which is our new favorite show, or at least mine. And what else? Watchmen.
The Morning Show.
The Morning Show. And the one that we're not totally sold on, His Dark Materials. But you should check it out. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, all of the places. Follow us at Breakfast All Day Podcast.
No, we are at Be Fast All Day.
Yes. Cool.
Follow us. Thanks. Bye.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.